There's some interesting things to look at as far as what's going on with mobile learning, mLearning right now. And we've listed those on this page. You can see that it's predicted by next year, 80% of those people that will be accessing or entering into the internet will be doing it from a mobile device. That's not too surprising as you start to travel around if you're in airports and looking. The mobile learning market is going to look like it's going to reach over $9 billion by 2015. The mobile workforce will reach 1.3 billion, or that's about 38% of the entire workforce globally. The 1.3 billion people working mobilely on mobile devices and such. Last year, 2013, 47% of the organizations in the U.S. started using mobile devices to support formal learning. Yet interesting, the high-performance organizations, a large portion of those, 68%, have not yet started to provide mobile learning options. And probably the most disturbing, I suppose, maybe is the right answer, observation is less than 10% of those people providing mobile learning have done anything to formally track, monitor, and report, and no way to evaluate the effectiveness. So the conclusion from that slide is, wow, mobile learning has finally started to take off. And yet there's a lot of growth still to happen, and there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done around the area of mobile learning. Just so you know, I have been in the training space since 1971. Yeah, that kind of ages me, sorry. And I've been in the e-learning space since its inception, and I've been working in and around with the mobile learning space since its inception. And I can tell you when cell phones first started to come out, there was a lot of talk and chatter in the training space about mobile learning, but it didn't really start until the smartphone, until of course the original one, of course, was the iPhone. And it was the advent of the iPhone that really started mobile learning along. But then the real significant event, of course, was the iPad/tablet. And when those came into being, all of a sudden, mobile learning has started to come into its own. Okay, so there's 10 things we want to look at. First thing that you need to know is there are some very definite benefits to mobile learning. One is a real improved productivity. You know, so follow the timeline. Back before e-learning, all the training was done at a location. The trainer either had to travel to the person had to travel to the trainer. Either way, the person receiving training was taken off of the job and taken to a classroom or to a conference room or whatever. E-learning improved that somewhat, particularly for those people who were working at a desk because they could still, quote-unquote, stay on the job while they were taking their training. But going on to mobile learning has increased that even more, where a person, even on a factory floor, can be taking training, maybe snippets of training from their mobile device in between tasks on the floor. So it's really increased overall productivity. There is, certainly looking down the lower left, an increase in the knowledge delivery aspect. So now we can get information that may be learning, training, or it may be more along the lines of process information or knowledge that's needed, job aids, procedures, those sorts of informational pieces that can be delivered. And it's right there at the fingertips of the person needing it right when they need it. Because of mobile learning, because of some of the parameters of mobile learning common sense, we'll talk about again in a moment, mobile learning tends to be very short snippets, so not long courses. And again, follow the timeline. Training courses tend to be 4 or 8 hours in length, or multiples of that. E-learning tended to be 1 hour or shorter in length, or multiples. So you'd take a 4-hour course and you'd break it up, and typically you could do a 4-hour classroom course in 3 hours using e-learning, and so you'd break it up into 3 1-hour lessons. With mobile learning, and again we'll kind of mention this again in a moment, but with mobile learning, you break those up even into smaller chunks, and you'll find, if you don't already know, that 10 minutes is kind of the rule of thumb. And so as a result, you end up with all of these snippets, 10-minute segments of training. And so when I'm on the job, I can go right back with my mobile device and review and find that. A friend of mine works in a machine shop, for example, classical machine shop where they're turning out unique pieces, and of course there's a tremendous amount of work done with measurements and very specific measurements, and they have shifted a lot of their training to mobile learning, and he tells me how oftentimes in getting into an unusual task before he turns on the lathe and starts to machine the piece, he oftentimes goes back to that one little 10-minute segment and reviews it, and he finds that overall it saves him hours in getting that task done. And then in the upper right-hand corner, of course, the reduction in learning and development costs and training costs. And the biggest one is getting rid of the travel expenses. A lot of that was started with e-learning. With mobile learning, that's even getting better and better. So there's a tremendous amount of savings going on. And then, of course, there are some intangibles. You see down at the bottom, the trainee has a much larger feeling of empowerment because now they can take the training when they need it, as they need it, at their own location. That leads to a better morale, a sense of freedom, and all of those together certainly helps in the retention. So there's some very definite benefits to consider for mobile learning. There are some things that you want to consider, do's and don'ts. On the left-hand side, you see the do's, and it starts out with do think out of the box. Think of unique, new, and different ways to deliver the training. Certainly you don't want to have a tremendous amount of talking head or slides with audio associated with it. And what seems to be working best is content that's centered on maintenance or repair, troubleshooting, quick tips, support, safety, compliance, those sorts of things where you can get a short message to the person and that person can save it or go back and review it later on. And as particularly with iPads and tablets, when you start to get touch screens, that sometimes you find it very, very useful to incorporate those into your mobile learning. So it's where so a person can actually use the advantages of the touch screen scrolling through the course or for clicking on the buttons, etc. So very definite things you don't want that you want to consider is you don't want to try to teach a lot of theory, whether it's product theory or just background theory. And certainly you don't want to talk about a lot of things like algorithm design or those in-depth knowledge pieces. Oftentimes don't come across great using a mobile device. And you certainly don't want to consider taking your e-learning and convert that into a one-to-one basis. Just like transitioning from training, classical classroom-based training to e-learning, you didn't want to do a one-to-one transfer. The same thing is true when you're going to mLearning. You don't want to have a one-to-one from e-learning. You want to take advantage of the mobile device and recognize that the person is on a mobile device. Recognize that not only is it sometimes a smaller screen, but they're likely looking at it with a lot of background noise or a lot of activity going on. They're not necessarily at a quiet space. And you want to consider that as you go forward with developing your mobile learning. I don't see any questions so far, so I'm assuming that so far everything is clear. So the third thing is to look at the design and the delivery. Recognize that with mobile learning, the environment, the place where they're at, is going to be very fluid, and it's going to be unpredictable. You don't want to have a lengthy mobile course, an hour in length, or even 45 minutes in length. You want to break those down, and the magic rule of thumb is maybe a 10-minute segment. Now, obviously use common sense. If you've got a topic that really to adequately deliver that is going to take a minimum of 15 minutes, well, break the rule and make it 15 minutes. But if you can do something to break those down into chunks, 10 minutes seems to be a very, very good number to shoot for. Because it is a mobile, and because you do have oftentimes now on a mobile device, particularly tablets and iPads, very, very good graphics, you want to consider using a lot of graphics or animation, those sort of things, rather than just text and voice. Also remember, the person is likely going to be in a noisy area. And because they're in a noisy area, you want to be very concerned about how much voice you have. Caroline, I see you have a great question, by the way. Caroline, nice to quote-unquote see you again. Haven't talked to you for quite a while. You've got a very good question on how do you deal with the variety of mobile devices. If you can wait just a couple of slides, we're actually going to touch that, but I really appreciate that question. It's a good straight line getting ready for what's coming up in a little bit, so we're going to talk about that here in a minute. The next time, going down on the left-hand side, you want to follow an informative structure rather than an instructional one. Remember, the neat thing with mobile devices, with mLearning, is you will find that as you create it, a large portion of that will be reused again and again to review, to inform, or like my friend at the machine shop, to use that as a refresher just before they do the task. One of the huge advantages of mobile learning. There's a new car company out in the west coast of United States, actually in California, and all of their training, they're relatively new, they're making electric cars, all of their training is done on mobile devices. In fact, all of their training is done on iPads. One of the reasons why they did that is that each employee is issued an iPad for training and for other things, procedures and checklists, and all of that is all done now electronically on iPads. But they felt that the nice thing was, if the person was going to be setting up a robot that's going to be welding, let's say, on the vehicle, and they weren't sure, they could go back and review that training very, very quickly. And it was intended to be that way. Assessments is something that also you want to consider. We want to do assessments differently, maybe using media to do those assessments. And you got to stop and consider, is it really going to be important that every one of those 10-minute modules has an assessment? Probably not. And so you probably want to have an assessment that's going to be at the end of a number of modules, kind of an end of module quiz sort of thing. You also have the advantage, obviously, on mobile learning, in that literally the entire world through the internet is opened up to the person. And so you want to be able to use those that access as reference materials. So if there's a online video that shows how the task is done, even if it's not yours, or if there's a procedure someplace, or if there's a government regulation or reference material, or the tech manual, etc., 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 you want to liberally use that throughout the mobile learning for those. And then one of the still difficult things, but getting better, is you want to integrate all of this into your learning management system, into your tracking system, so that you can see how people are doing, how they're using it, and be able to go back and assess the value of what you've created. Okay, so Caroline came up with a great question for item number 4, and actually it's going to be a couple more slides, but some of the challenges with mobile learning. As you know, there's a wide variety of particularly in the hardware. We've got iPads, which are an animal all to themselves, and of course you've got the Android or other tablets, and then added into that you have the smartphones, iPhones, and Androids, and others. So how do I deal with all those? Well, first of all, I have different screen sizes. It's a decision you need to make. Am I going to want my mobile my mobile learning to be able to be delivered on all devices? So do I want someone to be able to access it on the tiny screen of an iPhone? Or am I going to restrict it just to iPads and to tablets? That's certainly something that you need to recognize. You also need to recognize that there's going to be a wide variety in the amount of memory that each one of those devices are going to have. And there's going to be a difference in the battery life, the life of the battery for each one of those devices. And there are some manufacturer's restrictions. This will come up again, but the number one manufacturer's restriction is iPads and iPhones will not play Flash. And it's a bit beyond where we're at today, but it would appear like that will never change, that if you've got an Android phone or an Android or a tablet, you'll be able to play Flash. If you've got an iPhone or an iPad, you won't be able to play Flash, or they won't be able to play Flash. And then, of course, each one of those devices has its own operating system and its slightly own way of delivering each one of those courses, and you need to know that. Now, if you're in a company and you have control, or someone has control, of what devices the students can use, your problems start to evaporate, right? If everybody's got an iPad, I deliver that. If everybody's got a Samsung tablet, I can deliver on that. It's a little easier once I know what I'm working with. If you're in an organization that's delivering training to the public, or if you're not trying to control the delivery device, and so everybody can bring their own device, a BYOD, then you've got a bigger problem, and you've got to stop to consider, how do I create the material so that everybody can see it? Christine asked a very good question. What would you use instead of Flash? It's almost like I'm paying you guys to come up with the straight lines for the next joke, and I appreciate that. Christine, we're going to cover that in a second. Thank you so much for asking, because that's a very important question. So, right along with Christine's question, what about media file formats? Now, not everybody agrees with me. There's a surprise. But it seems like that HTML5 has become the default for delivery for mobile devices. Now, looking at this slide, you see over on the right-hand side, Flash is the most interactive development tool that there is. Always has been. I was going to say always will be, but that actually it may not be true. There's a lot of work going on HTML5 that may make that better over time, and there are a couple of other packages that are being used that may be better. However, HTML5 is universal. It will work on iPads, iPhones, as well as it'll work on Androids, Android phones, Android tablets, and other devices. So if you've got control and you know that everybody is going to be on an Android, you may say, I want to develop in Flash, because everybody that's ever going to view this is going to be on an Android tablet, and therefore I've got no problem. If you're not sure, and that means people may try to access it on an iPad or an iPhone, my suggestion is, for right now, you probably want to consider having that material developed in HTML5. And put up with the fact that it doesn't have as much interactivity right now today as Flash. There are, of course, other choices. If it's going to be audio files, you can do MP3s, MP4s. If it's going to be movies, you can do MP4s. My problem with obviously too much audio and too much video with audio attached is, as we talked about before, it may be difficult for the person if they're in a noisy area, and that does tend to take a lot more data download, and it tends to burn up more and more battery life, so that may not be the best option. So HTML5 may be the default. Flash has its problem that there are some devices, Apple devices, that will not play Flash. So Christine, hopefully that answers your question, and Caroline, hopefully I'm answering the questions that you had about how do we deal with different devices. Media types. How am I going to deliver this? Obviously, there's a number of ways that I can deliver it. One, over on the right-hand side, I can put it into a browser, make it available, and then the participant uses whatever their favorite tool is, Google or Chrome or whatever, and goes to that URL and sees the material there. Or they go to a learning management system if the learning management system is set up for mobile devices, and they can go there, access the course, and play it online. One disadvantage with that is, of course, if I want to see that material later, I've got to go back and connect to the internet later. If I'm always going to be in a place where there's a hotspot, or if I know I'm always going to have good coverage, that may not be so bad. If I'm a little spotty on that, or let's say I'm going to be in an airplane where I may not have access to the internet, or I may not want to pay the $5.95 to get the internet on the airplane, I now no longer have access to that material. So one of the other choices, going back to the left, is doing podcasts. All the limits before, because podcasts tend to be oftentimes much more audio, so we have a potential problem with that. Thanks, Caroline. I appreciate the comment. But that can be a very good option, particularly if you've got safety information or a very critical information that needs to be addressed. You may find that podcasts may be excellent for that. If you're going to be delivering a number of 10-minute segments, let's say 6, so you're going to be delivering really an hour's worth of training broken up into 10 pieces, 6 pieces of 10 minutes each, you may find that that may not be the best solution. Another solution that may be good is to having apps that can be downloaded to the person's device. So they have the choice, maybe, that they can view it online, or they can download that, and that can be obviously something that's free, most likely, or something that maybe has to be paid for if it's something that you're going to be delivering to the public and you want the public to be able to pay for it. So I can do apps, and then the person downloads that app, and now it's on their device. And you can readily see the advantage if it's on my device, if it's something that I may want to come back and review again later. I now have it right there on my, let's say, my tablet, and I want to go in as my friend at the machine shop, and I want to go in and review that information. I have that option right away. And there's a number of options along with that. You can do custom applications. You can integrate the player, has messaging and assessment tools all built into it. The tools for building apps is getting better and better, much more powerful, and like everything, getting easier and easier to use. 3 years ago, I would probably say don't consider making it an app because it's so difficult unless you're going to an outside consultant who has done that a number of times. Fortunately now, those tools are all getting easier to use, and that anybody, even someone like myself, can do that. Number 7. If you're going to be talking about mLearning, obviously we've talked about the devices itself. We've talked about some of the problems or some of the things to consider with the building, Flash versus HTML5 or some of the other tools. We also have to consider the network itself. How is the person going to access? What's the mechanism for them to be able to find this training? And hopefully it's all the way over to the right, the second one up with the little antenna sticking up. Maybe the location where the person is at has Wi-Fi, and they can access the Wi-Fi of that location. Works really great if your trainers are all in your company's locations, their offices, their shop floor or whatever, and you have Wi-Fi. Even if obviously you have multiple facilities. If each one of those have Wi-Fi, your problems are over as far as them accessing it, and they can easily get the information right there over your Wi-Fi. You certainly do want to talk to your IT people. if that's going to be the way you're going to deliver it, they need to have a good feeling for how much data transfer is going to be happening over that Wi-Fi. If it's going to be an app, well, there's going to be a big burst as that app is downloaded, but then nothing thereafter. If they're going to be accessing it through a URL, through a browser, there may be continual data streaming, and so now if you got 10 people taking that same course, you can see the problem. So IT is going to want to know about that, but that's the ideal. Down at the bottom, the one to the right and down to the bottom, is also a consideration that can easily be done now, which is offline. Right away, of course, as soon as I say offline, obviously something has to have been downloaded to the device, and so that probably will have been an application that will be done there. If I go all the way up to the top, generation of mobile networks, I think you're all familiar with where we're at. In the United States, we are getting to the point where certainly all major metropolitan areas are now 4G. Still in some of the rural areas, we are 3G, and only a handful of places are 2G. But we've gotten pretty good networks. The other neat thing that's happening, of course, is free Wi-Fi or minimal cost Wi-Fi is happening all over the place. I'm near Boston, and Boston has a plan that I think they're saying 2020, that they intend to have the entire city of Boston free Wi-Fi. And there's a lot of neighborhoods already that have free Wi-Fi. The antenna's out on the telephone poles, and you can access it, and it's pretty darn good access. In fact, right up there with almost with 4G access. So that's getting better and better, and we all know McDonald's, Burger King, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts up here in the Northeast, etc., etc. Most stores now, Target, Walmart, etc., all have a Wi-Fi that you can access, and so that may be the way to go if the person is outside of your facility. So if you're providing training for a salesperson or traveling maintenance person or executives, the way to go. Most airports now have Wi-Fi. Most of them are free. But it's something that you need to know because you need to develop the material for the very, very lowest, or here it says the weakest link, but the very lowest connection speed. You don't want to build tremendous mLearning that because the person is traveling in a rural area and only has access to 2G, it takes them forever to get that information downloaded. Obviously, the more frustrating it is, the less likely it is that the person's actually going to take the training or going to really get much out of the training, unless they're different than I. If I was waiting for an application to download and it took a significant amount of time, which in today's world is probably 5 minutes, right? But I would get so frustrated that I probably wouldn't be in the best of moods to look at the 10-minute mLearning that was delivered. But so you've got to consider and know what's the weakest that we're going to have, and then shoot for the weakest, the one that's going to be the most difficult, and then everybody that's on Wi-Fi, everybody that's on 4G is going to be thrilled at that. They start to download the material, or they try to access it, and they have almost instant access. Again, I don't see any new questions. Either this is all clear, or you're just so confused at this point that you don't know what to ask, and I hope that that's not true. Now, here's some challenges, and that is in the whole area of delayed. Oh, great. Thanks, Catherine. I appreciate your comment that it's clear. Sometimes it's hard to tell on a webinar, right? But there are some certainly things to be considered in interactivity. If you've ever done anything on a mobile device that's similar to it, you know that complex interactions oftentimes have a delay unless you're on a very, very good network or you have 4G access. And you don't want to do anything like that that's going to end up with poor performance on the learner's aspect. So if you're going to be doing training, let's say, and that training is going to be delivered to executives who travel all over the globe because you have offices throughout the world, you want to stop and think about what happens if this person is in a remote area. What happens if they're in Malaysia and they leave the city of Kuala Lumpur and go out into the to the more remote areas? What's that going to look like? How's that going to work out? And you might want to stay away from too much interactivity as a result of that. Now, there are some options that are available that you can consider. When I'm talking now about interactivity, I'm talking about the participant doing something on the device to feed information back to you. And one of the great ways, and I already mentioned that there are a couple of application tools that incorporate messaging or instant messengers or chat rooms, but that's something that you might want to look into. Again, depending upon your company, but a lot of companies already have some kind of messaging already built into their network that's available. Or if nothing else, you can always fall back on the easy-to-use tools like Skype, for example. And so one way that you might want to get that interactivity going is by using that. And that way, even if the connection is poor, they can give you feedback, whether that is answers to questions or comments about the training, whatever you want back from them. One of the ways is to use one of those messaging tools to get that interactivity going. Now, of course, that brings another issue that goes right along with that is who's going to be monitoring that, or are we not going to have instantaneous reply back? I couldn't think of the word, and it's only reply, but instantaneous reply. So again, I don't know how many of you work across the globe. I'm privileged to be able to work with some fine people in India, and they and I both recognize that sometimes we'll put a question or comment into Skype, and because they're sleeping when I put it in, or vice versa, I'm sleeping when they put it in, that there may be a delay in my response to them or their response to me. And that's getting more and more acceptable. Again, you got to know your audience, and if that's not acceptable, then you may need to consider how am I going to have that instant message work so when they ask a question or make a comment, somebody can respond to that right away. But a very, very great tool right now to be able to use along with mobile learning. Resource materials. I kind of mentioned this before. If there's one thing that mobile learning has really, really brought to light, is the availability of auxiliary materials to go along with the training. That option was always there for us with e-learning, but it was a bit more cumbersome to get there sometimes. So even though I might put a link in to my e-learning, when the person went to click on it, it probably opened up another browser and they weren't comfortable with it, or maybe that browser was restricted because of the firewall on the corporation, etc., etc., and so they could never really get to it, or they were outside the firewall and they couldn't get to the material. With mobile learning, that's becoming much, much easier because there typically is no firewall there yet, and hopefully won't be. And so it's very easy to and very important to incorporate resource materials. So those may be tech manuals, maybe procedures, maybe state or federal regulations, maybe websites or other information that you can make available to that person. So while they're taking the training, even though it's a 10-minute training course, in fact, they may end up getting an hour's worth of material by the time they go through and look at all the reference material. And of course, the really nice thing is if that reference material is things that can be downloaded and turned into apps, so they can be downloaded, we can get that reference material available to the participant so they can use it all the time. Again, going back to my friend at the tool machine shop, in that he maintains a lot of materials now on his smartphone that he can access that helps him do his job. So we've gone way beyond training, and we've now gone into job aids. Caroline wants to know what the best practices are you currently seeing in mobile learning options. Caroline, I'm sorry, I don't know that that's really clear what you're asking. Could you ask that just a different way and see if maybe I can kind of get your frame of mind what you're trying to ask. Okay, the last challenge that we want to, thanks Caroline, go ahead and I'll be looking for it. The last challenge we want to talk about is the fact that it's no longer a controlled learning environment. The trainer has no control now, and unfortunately also oftentimes the participant doesn't have any control. It's oftentimes now catch as catch can. We're all way overloaded. And so oftentimes all I can do is grab that learning material on my tablet when I've got time, and I may be in the lunchroom, I may be out on the shop floor, I may be in a restaurant, in the Starbucks, I may be in an airport waiting, and so it's really hard to have any real control. And so when we build the mobile learning, we need to consider all of those things and try to incorporate those ideas into the mobile learning. So again, a lot of animation, video works good, but without a lot of audio because we don't know what the background is going to be like. A lot more visual and at the same time decrease the interactivity. You know, probably mobile learning isn't the best way to teach somebody how to operate a piece of machinery or how to drive a car. E-learning may be much better for that at this point, though obviously mobile learning is changing. And our world has changed, and so the mobile learning needs to be engaging and attractive. I mean, the truth of the matter is, wow, right? You look across the internet and wow, look at some of the things that are being done. Look at the just phenomenal videos that are being produced and are on YouTube, for example. I mean, there's some junky ones too, but there's some really great things being delivered. Or look at websites. If you're old like me, you could probably remember back to some of the initial websites, and in comparison to today, wow, they were pretty ugly and not very user-friendly and certainly not very attractive. Look at what we've got today. And so there's an expectation for people when they turn on their mobile device. There's an expectation of what they're going to see, and we need to kind of build to that standard. And then, of course, the last one is we do want to have some tracking system, a learning management system, some kind of tracking system, so we can always go back and see what the person has done. And that's for a number of reasons. And let me give you a good example. Although I just said training on how to operate a car may not be the best thing done. In fact, if you bought a Mercedes, at least here in the U.S. Recently, you used to get a DVD. Now you get apps that you can download and or websites that you can go to on your mobile device that will show you how to tune the radio to the station that you want, how to set up presets, how to turn the lights on, how to turn the wipers, how to make the wipers work delay, so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, as you're doing that, their system is recording the fact that you have done that. And you don't know it, but when you bought a vehicle, you were registered in that system underneath your own unique number identifier. And so if you call up and say, gee, I don't know how to adjust the presets on the radio, the person can literally look in their system, their quote-unquote LMS, though that's not what they refer to it as, and see whether or not you looked at that module. Obviously, they're probably not going to let you know that they know, but if you haven't, they can encourage you to look at that module or make that module available to you on your smartphone right away. Or if you have, they can start to determine what was done poorly about that module that might need improvement so they don't receive a phone call again. A very interesting use of mobile learning. Let's see. So Caroline says there are some groups that have already designed mLearning options. What are the best practices? That is, who is doing this successfully? Yes, and I am speaking in generalities, Caroline, because I don't know each person's situation here that's on the call. those things will change drastically if you are in a corporation or whether you're delivering training to the public. As I recall, Caroline, a lot of your training goes to the public, and so therefore you've got to be considered, and one of the best practices is, if you're going to the public, is you need to design and develop it for the lowest common denominator. So if I were you, as I recall, Caroline, you're looking to deliver training mostly inside the United States, but not to a particular corporation, but to the general public. So if I were you, I would design it so that it is playable on a 3G network. I would also design it so that it's playable on all devices, and therefore probably have it developed in HTML5. Since it's going to be HTML5 and on a 3G network, you would definitely want to limit the amount of interactivity that's going on inside it, and yet because it's going to the public and you don't know who's going to be looking at it, you would want to have very sharp, clear graphics and animations and videos, and any audio that you want done, you'd want to make sure it's very clear and crisp. So it all depends upon what you're going to, who you're going to deliver to. Now, if I was going to be delivering in a corporation, and I knew that that corporation had Wi-Fi at all of the locations where the participants were going to be accessed, and I know the corporation had given everybody an Android tablet, well, now I could develop something that is much, much more interactive. I could use a lot more video because, after all, we're on a Wi-Fi. Because I'm on an Android, I know that I could use Flash because I don't care. No one's going to use an iPhone anyway, so it's going to be playable. And so I can be very, very specific. But the first question is, what is the environment? Who are you going to be delivering to? What kind of mobile devices are they going to have? What kind of connections are they going to have? If I were going to go on, let's say, Caroline, let's say that you wanted to start delivering training to all of the Catholic parishes in, I'm just using a crazy example, of all the Catholic parishes in Thailand. Well, once I assess Thailand, I may find out that some of those are on very, very weak networks, maybe down at 2G, and maybe there's not a lot of hotspots there, not a lot of Wi-Fi's. Well, now I would drastically decrease the amount of interactivities. I would also be very careful about how heavy any animations or graphics are, because I don't want to frustrate the people when they go to try to view or download it. And because they would likely be coming on with any device, I would then build it probably in HTML5, so no matter whether they access on a iPhone, iPad, tablet, or Android phone, they'd be able to get it. Does that answer the question, Stacy and Caroline? Does that answer what you were looking for? Is there any kind of worksheet to assist us in figuring out what direction we should go? Wow, Caroline, that is an outstanding question. I unfortunately would have to answer and say, no, I don't think so, but I'm going to also ask my good friend AJ, who is even more experienced in this than I am, to be able to answer that. AJ, if you have any more, do you know of any kind of worksheet or website or anything that you can use to figure out what direction we can go? Here's one thing I will tell you, though. I am always, anybody that knows me, Caroline knows me, John Richardson knows me, I am always willing to share anything that I know with anybody that has a need. So if each one of you has a specific question about what should I do, here's what I can promise. If you can call me or even ideally email me, and I'll put my email address in the chat room. I'll see if I can do two things at once, but I'll put my email address. If you want to email me your specific requirements, you know, I'm trying to access the public, or I'm on a network and we've got Wi-Fi all over the place, whatever, and what you're trying to do, here's what I promise. I'll take that. I'll probably work with a couple of friends of mine, particularly at Ames Digital, who are doing a lot of work in mobile learning. I'll run that by them, and we'll come back to you with the best practices that we think might apply to what you're trying to do. Also, my friends at Ames Digital are also extremely knowledgeable. They've done a lot of work all over the world in converting e-learning to mobile learning. And they're the sponsors, by the way, of this webinar today. I have worked with them for a long time, and I know that they are very anxious to try to help. Yes, they're in business. Yes, they would hope that from a conversation that there may be a project sometime for them. But more importantly, they're very helpful in wanting to try to help people that want to move forward. And so I am also real sure that if needed, we could set up a telephone conference, maybe Skype, or set up a GoToMeeting or whatever, and we can chat back and forth, and you can pick their brain, and they'll help you with information. Yeah, and there's AJ from Ames Digital, so he's also somebody that you can contact. But I'll make all those arrangements. He's obviously in India. I'm here in the U.S., so happy to try to help. Okay, great questions. Thank you very much. I hope I was adequate in answering. I know you'd like to have some specific answers. Here are some ways that you can get a hold of me. There's my phone number. There's another email address for me at Ames Digital. Either that one or the eLearning Group Solutions will get right straight to me. I'm going to put another slide up, and while I'm doing that, also pause for a couple of minutes to see if there's other questions that or comments that you all would like to make. Ames Digital is committed to trying to help people not only in e-learning but in mobile learning, and so they're going to do another webinar, and I'm going to not only host it but present it. It's going to be sponsored though by Ames Digital, and the next one is going to be how do you measure the success of e-learning initiatives in your corporation, in your organization. That's going to be on Thursday, August 14th, also at 2 o'clock Eastern. You should be able to click on that registration link and go right to it, or if not, there is the registration link, which is www.instapresenter.com/PIID equals ED52D 889894B. So if you'd like to, you can click on that link and register for it. Also, everybody that participated today, I'll also send that information out in an email so you can click on it. Now, Christine, thank you very much. I appreciate the very kind comment. Yep, I'll go back again. Caroline wants me to go back to my contact information. There it is. Easiest way to get a hold of me is either by email or phone, whichever is best to you. And again, you can use, if you scroll back up, you can see my eLearning Group email or my Ames Digital email, whichever works. We're running about 7 minutes before the top of the hour. I certainly do want to make sure that I cover any questions or comments that you might have on today's presentation. Or you can also contact me anytime. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Appreciate your kind comments. John, it's good to, quote-unquote, talk to you again, and glad things are going well. Anyone else have any questions or comments for today? Great. Well, I'm going to assume, Celestial Holmes said, want to know if I'll be providing this link for this to view later. Oh, and Stacy, you're working with a group of educators. I'll tell you what, anybody that wants the link so they can go back and review this, I do believe, in fact, I know that this was recorded. I think my friend AJ was smart enough to click the recording. I didn't. And so I'll send out that link to anybody who asks. You've got my 2 email addresses. Certainly email me if you'd like that link, and I'll send it to you. Yeah, Catherine says may have work cut out for us going forward. You know, Catherine, what I found with mobile learning is the hard part is getting started. It was just like with e-learning. Once you got started and you kind of figured out the ground rules and the do's and the don'ts, I think you'll find it's not so hard. Yes, Stacy, can you email me to one of my email addresses, scase@alergroupsolutions.com or to steve.case@aimsdigital.com, either one, and tell me you want the link. Also, anybody that wants these slides, I'm also certainly pleased to be able to share those slides. I would ask that you not duplicate them, but it's certainly if you want to use them internally or use them as a resource, if that would be helpful, that's great. Or if you want to show it to others to say, hey, here's where we're going. This is some of the things we got to consider with mobile learning. That's always great. Just tell me also in an email, and I will do my best to get all of that to you. If you'd like to explore mobile learning more, or if you have a project coming up, if you've got some e-learning that you want to convert to mLearning, maybe the best way to do that is have Ames Digital work with you to develop the first one. And then once they've got the first one developed, if you're like me, you may be well suited then to do the second and the third and the fourth. Sometimes getting that first one done is always the difficult time.